For having me. I am Tim from Sipsmith. Has anybody here had Sipsmith before?
Yep.
Heard of Sipsmith before? So we're a little independent spirits company based down in London. We were actually the first distillery to open in London for nearly 200 years. I'm going to share with you a little bit about that story and about how we kind of came to be before talking a little bit more about our products and give you guys a little taster. Sort of the real kind of the two main guys, or the three main guys behind our brand here are Sam and Fairfax, and these two guys were working in the drinks industry over in the States, and Sam was over working for Fuller's, Fairfax was at Diageo, and they grew up together, they were good mates, and they used to meet up for drinks. And actually in America, sort of 10, 15 years ago, there was this huge craft movement going on, craft distillation, craft brewing, and the guys would meet up and they'd say, you know, oh, I went to this amazing distillery last week, I went to this amazing brewery last week, and you know, these places would open their doors, they'd welcome you in, they'd give you a drink, and the guys thought, well actually, wow, sort of the quality of what's being produced here and what's being sort of made in these small batch ways is far superior to the kind of white label products that everyone's used to and everyone drinks. So they'd meet up for drinks and they'd say, oh, I went to this great place, and tried this and tried that. And actually this kind of whole idea started to sort of be planted in their heads that what they wanted to do was set up a new sort of small, handcrafted, small artisan distillery back in London, bringing London Dry Gin back to London, back to the history of where London Dry Gin originated, and making small batch spirits and really giving the sort of the higher quality spirit to the consumer. So they spoke about this for a couple of years. They'd meet up for these drinks, they'd have these chats, and it finally got to the point where, you know, these guys, Sam and Fairfax, their family, their friends said to them, look guys, you either set up this distillery or you shut up about it. We don't want to hear any more. So they thought, you're right, we're going to do it. So they quit their jobs, they sold their houses, they moved back over, and they put the plans in place to set up this distillery. And we're based just in Hammersmith. If you sort of pick up any of these leaflets, at the back of them is a little picture of our still. And at the top right, I mean, you're not going to see from here, but we are quite literally in these tiny little garage doors. That is where we operate, all of us. There's 12 of us at the company now. We've got a tiny little office in a kind of sort of Wendy house out the back. It's really cold in the winter, really warm in the summer, and that's how it goes. But this is us. We got this 300 litre copper pot still. And actually, it took so long to get a license for this still. The guys originally set up and they were sort of ready to go, they had the business plan in order. They applied for a license and they phoned the guy in the government, at Revenues and Customs, and said, look, we're going to set up this 300 litre pot still distillery down in Hammersmith. We're going to distill gin, it's going to be awesome. Can you give us a license, please? And the guy actually sort of said to them, I don't really know what to say to that really. I'll get back to you in 6 months. And he got back to them and he said, sorry guys, it's a no. I can't grant you this license. And there's two reasons I can't grant you this license. Firstly, you're applying to distill on such a small scale, 300 litres, and actually the smallest still in London at the time, to put it into perspective, was 3,800 litres over at Beefeater. So such a small scale, 300 litres, that in the eyes of the law, we actually class what you're doing as a moonshine operation. And you're just making this to sell to your friends, your family, and we don't class it as a kind of viable operation. He said the second reason we can't grant you this license is actually nobody in our office knows what to do to grant this license. It hasn't been granted in London for nearly 200 years. So it was actually with a lot of help, this was a real sort of stunt, the business plan, everything, it was actually with a lot of help from the guys up in Scotland and the whiskey distilleries. And the movement over there had recently brought down the kind of distillation levels for whiskey in Scotland. So with the officers up there, we were finding the precedent sort of coming across from the States of this small batch production. We were finally given the go-ahead. And when I take people down to the distillery, this is usually the part when I get out our license and show them how sort of grand it is. But it's not. It's a sort of tear strip bit of A5 paper It's not very exciting at all, but that is London's first distilling licence for 200 years, and we're very proud of it. So that gave us the go-ahead, it gave us the green light to start distilling our London Dry Gin. And now I sort of touched on it earlier, what the real sort of passion was to bring this London Dry Gin back to London, where there was only really Beefeater doing it, but making it in these small batch ways. Now I don't know if anyone knows much about the kind of history of gin, but gin itself found its roots in the form of a Geneva spirit over in Holland, and it was a juniper-based spirit that was first kind of seen in pharmacies, and it was used for kind of medicinal purposes. People would go into these pharmacies with kidney disease, liver disease, and they'd be given this juniper spirit, and they'd consume. That was ironic considering how it's consumed today. But actually the British first came across this spirit when we were fighting in the 80 Years' War. And the British were fighting alongside the Dutch against the Spanish, and the Dutch soldiers would hand the British this Geneva spirit, and they'd say, go on, have a bit of that, that will sort of get you ready, and it'd pluck the guys up for battle. And that's where the phrase Dutch courage comes from. So if you learn one thing, that might be it. And so the British got a taste for this, and they came back to London, and they actually brought, after the war, William of Orange, who was the king over there, came and became our king over here with Mary II. And he was outraged that all the sort of spirits, all the wines, all the booze that we would get consuming over here was all coming across from Europe. So we were paying huge taxes to get booze over here. So actually what he did was he increased the import taxes so high that nobody could afford these spirits anymore. Nobody could afford to bring the booze over here that they could consume. So this caused outrage on the streets. But actually what he did at the same time was he abolished any form of licensing in terms of distillation. And this is kind of back in the 17th, 18th century. So abolishing this actually made people play around with their own kind of distillation. And you can distill a spirit from anything with a starch base. So usually if I ask people what vodka's made from, a lot of people say potatoes. We use an English barley with our vodka. You can use anything with a starch base. We actually tried grapes when we first started, but so people were quite literally at the time, people couldn't afford higher grade things to distill, and it got to the point where 1 in 4 homes in London had their own form of distillation, and this was kind of like a bathtub operation. And people were literally sweeping kind of wood chippings off pub floors, turning that into spirit, and playing around with gin distillation. Now, to be a gin, you have to have juniper present in your spirit, so that is the main botanical. But this is where the sort of kind of back when these 1 in 4 homes were distilling, this is when you get the phrases that you'll be familiar with today. Kind of gin makes you depressed, mother's ruin. This is the time of the gin craze. And actually it got to the point where the death rate started soaring above the birth rate, and there was kind of outrage on the streets. And I don't know if anyone here has seen Hogarth's Gin Lane before. It kind of sums up nicely what the gin drinkers at the time were like. They were outrageous, and it's amazing. I advise you to look at it. But anyway, there was this outrage. So what happened was the law was reintroduced, the Gin Act of 1751, and this introduced licensing on distillation again. So almost overnight, all these 1 in 4 homes could no longer distill. And this is the wealthier people. You had to pay £50 a year to distill, which doesn't sound like a lot now, but it's thousands and thousands of pounds worth back then. So this is when the wealthier families could actually pay this license and started to distill. And this is names you'll be familiar with today, people like the Tanquerays, the Gordons. These were the wealthy families that started to pay this license fee and started to distill and started to grow more popular. And as the kind of the demand for their product went up, these guys had to change the way they were making these things and increase their operations and left London. And this is really where the guys setting up Sipsmith wanted to do, was bring this whole kind of passion for London dry gin and the art of distillation there back to London. And this is kind of brings us to where we are now. We were the first distillery in London for 200 years, and we started distilling. We were given this license, and that gave us the green light to start our distillation. Now, a few years ago, gin wasn't very popular. Not a lot of people were drinking gin. So the guys thought, well, whilst the passion's there, the trendy thing, the cool thing that people are drinking now is vodka. So the guys started distilling a vodka. And actually, this is what I think, we're a little bit more known for our gin. But the vodka, I think, is one of our real unsung heroes. We use an English barley base spirit, and what we do is we pump this base spirit into Prudence, which is our still here, and we distill that, and we heat that up to the boiling point of alcohol, which is 78.6%. The vapours are going to rise, they're going to rise through the copper, and basically in the art of sort of distillation, what we want is these vapours to have as much interaction with this copper as possible, because the copper in the presence of the heat and the alcohol becomes porous and absorbs a lot of the impurities, the fatty acids, the sulfates. So these vapours are going to pass through our still, and they come down here with the vodka and this sort of middle chamber here. That's what you call a sort of a botanical chamber, a carter head. If you wanted to flavour your vodka, you could put lemons in there and you'd have a lemon vodka. And we actually tried doing a mustard vodka way back when, and we thought this is going to be amazing for Bloody Marys. Yeah. We put mustard powder in here.
You nearly killed people, didn't you?
Yeah, and the vapours that came through resulted in such strong fumes that the distillery had to be evacuated. And we're based on a residential street, so the neighbours weren't too happy, sort of breathing mustard for about 6 weeks. Yeah. So they got a few bottles on their doorsteps that year. So we stopped playing around with that and actually put production behind by quite a long time, so the whole still had to be cleaned out. But so we're bypassing this chamber. I don't know why I told you that, but it's a fun little story. So we're bypassing this chamber, and the vapours are coming into the 5-plate column here. And at the top of each of these windows is a copper plate with tiny little holes in it. The vapours are going to come into here, they're going to hit the copper plate, and the copper has got these tiny holes in it, not much vapour is going to pass through, a lot of it's going to hit that plate, turn back into a liquid, go all the way back down and back to the beginning, come out to pipe it back to the beginning. And this whole process of turning from a vapour to a liquid over and over is called refluxing. So we want this refluxing to occur as much as possible to ensure that the vapours are having this interaction with the copper and removing those impurities. And as the vapours rise to the top of this chamber here, this silver ring is a cold water bath. It's got cold water running through it. The vapours are going to hit that cold water, turn into a liquid and go all the way back to the beginning. But after a few hours, when we're happy that the vapours have had that interaction that we want, our distillers will slow the water rate down in this bath and allow the vapours to come to the final condenser here, which has got a cold water pipe running all the way down it. The vapours are going to hit that, and this is where we collect them off. Now, this is where a lot of people, in their sort of distillation methods, kind of mix that all together. That comes off our stills in the high 80, early 90%. Cut that down with water, stick it in your bottles, and that's what you get. But actually in distillation, these things come across in what's called heads, hearts, and tails. And the heads and the tails are the bad parts of the alcohol, the stuff you don't particularly want to drink. So actually what we do is we discard a large part of our distillate in heads and in tails. And all we do is keep a very small part of the heart cut, which is the pure part of the spirit that you want to consume. And we get rid of the heads and tails. We did have a guy come and ask us what we do with them, and actually they go down the drain. The council have to come and sort of observe us destructing it. But a guy came to us and said, well, I could use your heads and tails to power my car. I'm going to call it a vodka. There you go. But we thought that was pretty good, but a little bit dangerous, so we didn't go with that. So all we do is we keep that very small heart cut, and we lose about 20 to 30% of the production in heads and tails. We cut that down with water, it comes to 40%, which is the bottling strength, and this is what you get here, is our English barley vodka. And as we know to this day, I believe we're the only distilled vodka coming out of London. This is right to sort of pass the sample, that would be amazing. Is there any questions on that at all?
Why is it called Sipsmith?
Sipsmith. Sipsmith itself comes from when the guys set up, they were looking for a name, and Fairfax was one of our founders. His father was a well-known silversmith. So it comes back down to the art of smithery. So if you're a blacksmith, goldsmith, And he said, what you do isn't too dissimilar to what I do. I take a raw metal and I turn it into precious jewellery. You take a kind of base spirit and redistill it with your lovely botanicals, and what you do with that is you kind of sip your drink in a martini and a gin and tonic. So you are the Sipsmiths, and that's where it comes from.
Hi, are you selling your product only in Europe, or are you targeting other markets aside American one, Asian one?
We're in the States.
Okay.
We're in Australia now. We are in some sort of parts of Asia.
How do you market your product over Asia? Which kind of shops sell your product? Is that webs, and nightshops, and shop, distributor?
I couldn't answer that question.
The Australian one, maybe? You have an idea?
Australian, we're in vintage cellar stores, the off-trade, bar-wise, we're in a couple of main bars, cocktail bars.
So you don't really use distributor to sell your product?
We use guys called Living Campus over in Australia, if you know them. They distribute our products. Sam, one of our owners, heads up our international, so he's over in the States at the moment. He looks after Australia, so he does all the distribution, has those guys out there.
Alright, so this is your own business, where based?
Yeah, the guy that's our owner heads up the international. He does everything generally. Guys, if you hold off on your tasters, has everyone got one? Too late. Straight down. Has everyone got one? Good man. Guys, enjoy. This is our English barley vodka. And I hope you get from that kind of small hard cut that we're taking, from the distillation through that copper, it's going to be very smooth. And actually, because we don't actually run this through a filtration process, so it holds on to a lot of the initial character in the barley. Comes off very smooth. You get some kind of subtle, buttery, creamy notes, a little bit kind of peppery spices on the back end. But there you go. Cheers. Smoothness there makes it perfect for a vodka martini. Or, you know, for me, I like to serve it on the rocks actually, and just sip it with black pepper on top. But
In terms of pricing, how much you sell a bottle like this?
so these come through early 20s, so kind of between 20 to 25 pounds. Any questions on that still? Okay, the London Dry Gin. This is the real passion. This is what the guys set out to do. Now the London Dry Gin, we use the same base as our vodka. We take the base spirit, we pump it into prudence, and we add the water down to take that to 60%. This time we're using botanicals, we're using juniper. Now there's kind of three main classifications of gin. There's gin, just gin, there's London Dry Gin, and there's distilled gin. Just gin, you can take an undistilled spirit, a neutral grain spirit, add juniper berries, add anything else you want, leave that to kind of rest, cut it down with water, serve it. That is just a gin. It hasn't been through a distillation process. It's not going to be particularly sort of smooth. It's bathtub gin, exactly. And the difference between distilled gin and London Dry Gin. With a London Dry Gin, you can't add anything kind of after your distillation process. So what we cut off, you can't then add more flavourings. So people like Hendrick's, Martin Miller's, which are both great gins. But why they can't put London Dry on their bottle is because they add their cucumber infusions after the distillation process, which means they can't call themselves London Dry. We make this all in one shot. All our botanicals rest in our pot still for between 14 to 15 hours before our distillation. We use 10 botanicals, juniper berries, coriander seed, lemon, orange, licorice root, cassia bark, cinnamon, orris, almond powder, and angelica root. I hope that was 10, I just reeled them off, but there you go. These will sit for this maceration period of 14 to 15 hours overnight. Our distillers will come in the morning, heat this still up to 78.6 again to start getting those vapours rising. And the vapours are going to go through that reflux process again, they're going to hit the copper, go through that sort of purification, This time the gin actually goes straight across the condenser. We're to run this through the 5-plate column. It will sort of redistill it to such a fine level that all your flavours, all your oils that you've got from that maceration period would be lost. So this goes straight across the condenser. It's kind of heated up a lot more slowly, so the vapors have that interaction with the copper. But we take it off here, and what you're left with, again, we only take a very small hard cut. But I mentioned earlier that the big guys, when they're kind of trying to cut down their production costs, what people started to do was distill kind of 500 to 1,000 times the amount of botanicals you need and the same amount of spirit. So what they're left with is essentially a concentrate. So what will then go into that concentrate is an undistilled spirit to stretch that before adding water to bring the alcohol level down. So not only do you lose so much of your flavour, the presence of the undistilled spirit gives it a lot of harshness as you kind of drink it. So we don't do that. We make this all in what's called a one-shot method. So we distill the right amount of botanicals, the right amount of spirit. What we cut off, we just take a small hard cut, and we cut that down from the high 80s or % down to 41.6, which is our bottling strength. 41.6 sounds pretty specific. It is. This is where we believe that the kind of balance between the juniper and the citrus really hits it off nicely. And you'll get that if we pour some samples. You'll get that on the nose. It will hit you with juniper before sort of a little bit more citrus comes through. And as you drink it again, it's going to be wonderfully smooth. Juniper is going to lead, and then it's going to balance out into something a little bit more kind of lemon tarty, orange marmalade on the finish. So it carries itself in a gin and tonic, but it's smooth enough and it holds enough character to be stirred down in a wonderful dry martini. Is there any questions on that at all? Any questions, guys?
Or would you recommend cocktails with the gin then? Is there any kind of specific cocktails that you recommend?
So as I said, it's got that kind of wonderful smoothness to it. So just to stir down, I personally, everyone's got their martini differences, like a dry martini. Just kind of show the vermouth to it as it goes through. Other than that, a Negroni is a personal favourite. I don't know what anyone feels about that. Or a classic cocktail, Tom Collins or something.
That's a gin. That's a gin. Different one.
How does it compare with other kinds of gins, like Mason's gin, the new Mason's gin, your Mason's gin?
No.
Have you seen that?
I've not seen that actually.
It's brewed in Yorkshire, the new one that's just come onto the market.
There are a lot of gins that are popping up every now and then. I try as many as I can. I think what we do at Sipsmith, and what we set out to do, was make a very classic London dry gin. So we're not trying to kind of reinvent the wheel here. What we're trying to do is bring back a very classic old sort of recipe. And what we like to say is that the 10 botanicals that we use in our London dry gin wouldn't shock a 19th century distiller to this day. So London dry gin, as you drink it, you're going to get that juniper hit up front. It's going to balance out, again, like I said, just something a little bit more citrusy. Again, wonderfully smooth. Does everyone have one? Awesome. Now the other thing that we're going to move on to here, and this is a new product of ours. We don't often bring out too many new products, but this is our VJOP. And I brought this along because you know, it's a wonderful one for cocktails. Personally, I'm not the best mixologist in the world. What we like to do is give this to bartenders and they love it and they do what they sort of will and please with it. But what we do with our VJOP here, it's the same recipe as our classic London dry gin. But then what we do is we have 3 times the juniper berries and 4 times the maceration period. And we cut it down to 57.7%, so it's a higher proof gin and overproof spirit, but it still retains a wonderful sort of smoothness for that 57.7%, and it is a real juniper hit for those juniper heads amongst us. But I'll tuck into this and see what you guys think.
What?
Really good. I actually think personally I'm not I think James has too many of those things out of races because people get a bit dirty.
Give it a second. One arm fine. Driving up.
So you'll have to edit the first one. Level. This one's okay.